we do a lot of political action work in terms of criminal justice reform, education, and housing advocacy. So one of the things we're doing through the Housing Committee is this forum. And I wanted to start it out a little bit with talking to you folks, just having you tell us what you're most interested in hearing about, kind of what you're, because we've got a real broad range of topics in this seminar, everything from the history of discrimination in housing sales to, actually how to put your finances in order to get ready to buy a house. So we're just going to cover the whole thing. So I'd just like to hear a little bit from you about which things you're most interested in, so we make sure that we hit those. So can we start over there? Tell me your name and why you're here, what you want to learn.
My name is Aida.
I shouldn't have started with a person who was eating the donut. I'm sorry. Do you want to wait? You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
My name is Aida, and I'm here because I like to have some information about how to buy a house. Here, I want to buy a house, and I haven't been able to.
Haven't been able to? Okay. Well, we can give you information. Just don't be shy about asking questions. Okay, and Nathan? Hi.
My name is Anaida. I do own a house, but I'm here to be with my sister-in-law who is trying to be a first-time home buyer.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi, my name is I'm Teresa. As my sister-in-law said, I'm here to learn about how to acquire first-time home.
First-time home. And are you new to this area, or?
Yeah, I live in a house with my husband.
Okay.
So I think her name is in the title, but not in the mortgage. But she wants to buy, get a mortgage.
Get a mortgage and buy a house, right? That's what you have to do to get a mortgage.
If that would allow me
to
be a first-time home buyer.
Good. We have some information on that.
And, I'm Adrienne, and so this is all kind of unexpected for me. My mother passed away last month, and I live on the family estate, and have been living on the family estate for years. And my brother has inherited the estate, and yesterday he told me he's going to put me on a month-to-month lease. I'm 70 years old. I can't have that kind of stress. So now I have to be realistic. I need to do things on my terms. I'm thinking buying a home makes more sense than renting. And at 70, what are my options at 70 years old? It appears as though I might need to put a larger down payment down to have my monthly payments at a reasonable rate. Probably not something with homeowners association. I don't know. This is all less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
So I'm clueless.
So I'm 74 and I just bought a home last year, so we can talk.
So it can be done.
What's the first home though?
Okay.
Okay. What do you got, Nikki? Oh, how many do you make?
No, this is just the first batch. She's only bringing.
All right, we'll bring them up here and I'll put you with it.
Copies of that too.
Oh, okay. Ask him if he can come anymore.
Yes.
I don't know how many people are coming.
Thank you.
Make a 5 more of these. 5 more.
To see you today. Yeah.
Okay, next one, you heard Jake?
Jackson.
Jackson, okay.
Yeah, just information about the process and how to create the system orders.
Good. And you guys who just came in, we're asking everybody to say their name and kind of what they hope to get out of the session today, so we make sure we hit what you want.
Yeah. So I'm Diego.
And Diego.
And we're here just to check out the program and listen in today. We're young people looking to get a home in a turbulent economy. So we're looking at the best way to do it.
And who's just we're asking people to just say their name and what they want to get out of the session today.
Okay. My name is Mike Allen. I'm just here today to grab a lot of information spread the word of what's going on in the community and share the information with younger people also that's interested in housing.
Hi, my name is Maritza. I'm here to learn about how to become a home buyer.
Okay, great. So let me just briefly introduce the panels, because you're going to see them walking around here, and then we'll introduce them a little more when they start to speak. So Dee Carter is our first speaker, and Dee is an outstanding member of NACP Fairfax. She's also a multi-generational resident of Fairfax County, and she and her ancestors go way back here, and she'll talk a little bit about that. She's also a realtor, so she's the kind of person you're going to need if you buy a house, sell a house, and she has access to a lot of information because of that. One of the things is the printout she's giving you of the kind of price range you might encounter out there. She's going to speak about some of the things that her clients have to do in order to get qualified to buy a house. Okay, and the second solution will be Gentry Alexander. Gentry's over here. Gentry works for the County of Fairfax and the Department of Housing and Community Development. And he is the special guy who works pretty exclusively on homeownership. And he's going to tell you about county programs and how to get ready for buying homes. And we also have Nick Donnie over here in the intake table. And Nick works for the Equal Rights Center. And his center deals with fair housing issues kind of around the whole metro area. And they've done some research of rentals, for example, where you send a black couple and a white couple and then see if they get treated the same, that kind of thing. And they've also researched mortgage loans and real estate steering, which are two of the areas that have a history of discrimination. So he's going to tell you about some of that work, some of the findings that they did where that is around this area. Okay, so we've got coffee and donuts over here. Free anytime you want to grab some.
And sandwiches.
And we're going to have sandwiches. We'll try to finish. We'll start eating the sandwiches maybe around noon, and have a little more time to talk and interact with people over some food. Okay. Whoops. I'm losing the.
I'm going to get a donut because
donut.
take a minute. Yeah, I'll take a minute.
Okay. So, we're making more copies of this list of homes that she found, and there's actually more of them than I expected in a kind of lower price range. But I'm going to warn you, there are probably many at that level. Most of the homes are more expensive. If you see something in a low area, you're gonna, when you're ready, move in on it because there aren't that many. Okay, Pete, you ready to talk about this? Okay, he's going to talk about perspective of homeownership, homeownership in Fairfax County.
My name is Dee Carter. I'm a realtor with KW Nicholson and Deanna Thompson. I've been with them now for about since 2007. And it's been an interesting ride being a realtor. You do meet a lot of nice people. And my thing is, whatever client I have, I make sure they're my focus, and I make sure they try to get the best deal possible. I try to. Most of the people I work with is mostly people of color. That is my focus. So, but if anybody else comes along and say, I would refer someone to purchase a home, I will work with them. But I don't go out, I don't advertise or anything like that. So I look for referrals. My family, like Mary said, my family has been here multi-generational. We've been here since Native American days. So my great-grandmother must have traveled all through this area. And she was an Indian warrior chief. And she burned down the first courthouse at Tyson's information that probably be helpful. If you have any questions, just say, I have a question, and I'll just stop and answer the question. So the next slide goes into the population of Virginia. If you look at the total population in Virginia in 2024, it was 8.8 million, 8.8 million people here in the state of Virginia, and you go down, you see what the white population is, Asian population, and the African American population, and then it goes down from there. And then the next slide is Fairfax County. Fairfax County population is 1.2 million people, and the white population is about 734,000. Then the Asian population is next, and then it's the African American community, and then it goes down from there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the African American communities in Fairfax County. When I was growing up, there were like many African American communities all throughout Fairfax County, from Alexandria all the way to Herndon, Centerville, all the way to Springfield, Vienna, McLean, Tyson's Corner, Grainsville, which is Great Falls, Herndon area, and now I don't know if anybody heard of the George Mason African American Inventory Project. Has anybody heard about that project? No. Okay. It's a project where they were working with the Fairfax. Has anybody heard of the Fairfax County History Commission? Okay. For those that don't know, the History Commission was established, I think, in 1969, where Fairfax County wanted to gather the history of the county. And I had started working with them in 2000, I think it was 2020, where they were focusing on the African American communities and the Native American communities. And they didn't have very much information, I guess because they didn't focus on it. So now they start focusing on the communities within the area. And Fairfax County decided that they didn't want to have a museum in the county, like some other places have a museum where they focus on the history of the county. But the county passed it on to the George Mason University, I think the history department or somewhere. And they started this inventory of African American communities, African American history in Fairfax County. And right now it's just a list. I'm not sure, they try to work with a lot of people, but I tell folks that if you want to know about the African American community, you have to go to the Black church, because that's where now you still have a few communities still around, but you still have the Black church around where everybody attends the same church that they grew up in, all that good stuff. And I told them you have to get to know the people in the community. Most people are not going to talk to you if they don't know you. And so I don't know where they are with this project, but they've been collecting a lot of data. And with the data they have, I'm not sure what they're doing.
I have a question. That 1870 up there?
Yes,
That's correct.
Wait, this is just the beginning.
Okay.
This is just the beginning. So if I go down a little bit further, here's some more African American communities. And they have Orchard Corner on here, but okay, there's Chesapeake. Okay. All right. But Chesapeake used to be called at one time Lincolnville. I don't know if anybody knows that or not, but that's a history that goes back to the Civil War days. That was called Lincolnville before it was called Chesapeake. And I go down, here's some more African American communities. And this is what the project has. They said there were 52 African American communities. And I said that's not true. So I added what I know. So if anybody else knows of other African American communities, just let me know and I'll add this to this list. But I found out there's Spring Hill, was at the intersection of Spring Hill Road and Old Dominion Road, Coastown and Beale Road in Vienna, McLean with the Carter family, which owns part of where the CIA is located, the Heisen community, which is the Falls Church at Heisen Drive and Route 29. Has anybody ever been to any of these areas?
Yes.
Okay. The next one is Seven Corners. Did anybody know that the Foot family owns Seven Corners? was black families that owned Seven Points at one time. And Margaret Foote was she was a Carter, so she was a descendant of Carter family. So the next one is Coatstown in Centerville, which is at Centerville Road in Chantilly. Then there was West Springfield. Anybody heard of 11 Oaks? That's in the city of Fairfax. That was a black community too. George Mason University was owned by a black family as well. Corsica Road in Vienna on Dale Road, that was also a black community. Changebridge Road to School Street in Fairfax was all black. Courthouse Road, Courthouse Hills and Stony Hill was a black community. That's where my family came from, way before any of this was around. And then Freedom Hill in Vienna. Has anybody heard of Freedom Hill? Okay, well, that was another black community. And then Wolf Trap was another black community. Sutton Road was another black community. Blake Lane, Cedar Lane, Grainsville and Herndon, Fairfax Station. Anybody know there was black families in Fairfax Station? I guess not, okay. Lorton, there were black families in Lorton, and then Spring Hill and Village Crossroads. Did anybody know there was Spring Hill and Village Crossroads? Pardon?
Yes.
You didn't know that one yet. So there was Spring Hill and Village Crossroads as well. So, and then I tried to figure out how many black communities are still around. I don't know if I missed something, just let me know. Right now it's Village Crossroads, East Woodford. Has anybody heard of East Woodford, Virginia? East Woodford? That's in Vienna. That's along Electric Avenue all the way over to Gallup Road. That was called East Woodford. Have anybody heard of Dunmore?
Yes.
Okay. It's over in the Dunmore area. And Young Springs, which is still there. And James Lee. Has anybody heard of James Lee community? And then Cyburn. Does anybody know about Cyburn? Yeah, you know about Cyburn. And then Timmy Hill and Falls Church. Does anybody know about Timmy Hill and Falls Church? And then Vienna. Vienna still has somewhat of a black community that's still around. They're in pockets, but it's still around.
Just one question.
Yes.
What do you consider as a black community now? Because I know people probably drive through some and, you don't see black
Right. I mean, for me, a black community is if you've been around for a long time and you're still there, I consider that a black community. Like my family had lived in the same area. We lived along Courthouse all the way down to Maple Avenue. So we own probably about maybe 15 acres of land. All that land is gone except probably about maybe 2 acres. But we owned all of that land, and that was all black community. That was all of my family.
Did you ever, in your town, ever go to Luther Jackson?
Yes.
Yeah.
But before that, they all went to Manassas Industrial. That's where my parents were. Well, that's where my dad was. He lived in Fairfax. My mom lived in Manassas, so she was always there. But my dad was bused from Vienna to Manassas. And I'm sure the folks down here were bused from Alexandria to Manassas.
And Luther Jackson.
Luther Jackson to Manassas.
Yeah.
So do you
Before that, everybody went to Manassas. Or if you knew someone that lived in D.C. and had family that lived in D.C., a lot of people went to school in D.C. They not only went to school in Manassas, but they also went to school in Washington.
So we still have family from 1865, and we're still in McLean.
You still, okay.
Yeah, we have.
That's why I said I may have
Yeah.
missed folks, you know?
Yeah,
But
because my
there's
grandfather
lots of
bought that
communities.
property in 1865.
Okay.
It was 26 acres, and now I think we have like 5 acres of family that are still there in McLean.
Okay.
So the Carter and the Hall families were the original
Mm-hmm.
black families
Correct.
in McLean.
I've done some research on Cyrus Carter. Extensive.
Yeah, yeah.
He was, Cyrus Carter was the one that started a lot of black churches in the western part of the state. And, he started like 5 different churches. He started in Chesterbrook, First Baptist single family homes. And so the next slide goes into prices of homes. So a one bedroom, one bath condo is $150 to $475. But you also have to take into account the condo fees and also HOA fees, and possibly in some places could be parking fees. So, and then in addition to that, some places also charge additional maintenance fees as well for a condo. And then a two bedroom, one bath goes from $180 to about $750, but you know, when you get into $750, man, you're getting into a luxury condo. And then the two bedroom, one and a half bath goes to $350 to $470. A two bedroom, two bath condo goes from $250 to $400. And these are active listings. The three bedroom, one bath goes from $240 to $300. And then a three bedroom and one and a half bath goes from $240 to $360. And then when you look at townhouses, now you're getting into a little bit higher range of homes for sale. So a three bedroom, two bath goes from $475 to $540. A three and a half bath to two and a half bath goes from $369 to $780. But when you talk about $780, probably $700 and above, now you're talking about a luxury condo, a luxury townhome. You know, it's gonna be more expensive and everything. And it has a lot more amenities and, you know, rather than a smaller townhome. A three bedroom, three bath goes from $519 to $700. A three bedroom, three and a half bath goes from $650 to $790. Three bedroom and three bath with two half baths go from $740 to $760. God bless you. Four bedroom and two bath goes from $590 to $600. A four bedroom, two and a half bath goes from $620 to $640. And then a four bedroom and two baths and two half baths goes from $650 to $700. $660. And that's a townhome. And now you're moving into a single family home. Single family home for a four bedroom, two bath is $620 to $765. When you get into the $700 range, you know it's gonna be a little bit more expensive and may require a little bit more down payment. But you can put at least $5,000 down on, you know, as a deposit for a home, any home, condo, townhome, whatever. First time home buyers, there's a lot of programs out there for you. A lot of programs. First time home buyer. I tell people if they're a first time home buyer, there's so much, there's grants and loans and a whole bunch of other stuff out there that people are willing to help first time home buyers. So if you're a first time home buyer, there's lots of programs. Lots of programs out there. So if you get into a four bedroom, two and a half bath, now you're looking at $610 to $760, and four bedrooms and three baths, $650 to $799, and four bedroom, three and a half baths is $780 to $800, and then four bedroom and four baths is over $1 million. And when you get into the five bedrooms and all that, you know it's $1.5 million. It's a lot, it's very expensive. And then the next thing is looking at percentage of home ownership in the United States. So the first one is from the 2020 census. It talks about different races that own homes. 73.1% was white Americans. 7.9%, and this is just the U.S. 7.9% were African Americans. You go to Virginia, it's 72% and 72, and 13.2% for African Americans in Virginia. You go to Fairfax County, it's 61.9% for whites and 6.2% for blacks. That's just in Fairfax County. And then the next slide talks about in 2023, this is what I Asian, the next group, Hispanic is 54%, and blacks at 50%. Although we are home 50%. That is one thing. Anybody have any questions or?
Are those rates higher in Maryland? Do you, about the same?
I have a question. Yes. What do you think the cause of that is? Is there a fewer number of those different races in Fairfax County, or what's it? The Hispanic and the Asian community is increasing, and the black community is getting fewer and fewer. And you notice in my other slide where I said there's like 70+ African American communities or more in Fairfax County? You know, right now I think there's 8 African American communities. And I can tell you, black people, in Fairfax County there were a lot of black people that lived here from 1800s all the way up to probably maybe 90s, 2000. I mean, black folks own a lot of land in Fairfax County. I mean, a lot of land. You'd be surprised. If you do the research, all the black communities, everybody in those black communities owned their own homes. Everybody owned their own. There was no, couldn't get a loan from a savings and loan company. So a lot of these folks that lived here a long time ago built their homes from scratch. As they got paid, they built their homes and set up their communities and stuff like that. And now, because of commercialization, road expansion, what else, and all the black communities are gone. Take for example, Williamstown. Has anybody heard of Williamstown in Fairfax County? It was along this, if you know where Route 50 and Gallows Road is, that was one time an all-black community. Maryfield was one time, if anybody know Maryfield, that was an all-black community years ago, all black. Now you would never know it was an all-black community. The only way you know it was a black community at one time is because First Baptist Maryfield is still there. It's because the church and Luther Jackson is still there. And that was the first black high school, that was the only black high school in Fairfax County. So that's why I say people, I think people need to, my thing is I like history. And if I get a chance to talk to people, I tell them what this county was like years ago, when I was growing up. And I remember my grandfather telling me what it was like when he was growing up. So when my grandfather was growing up, they had a farm in Vienna. And, like most places around here were very agricultural. And they would take all their wares to Georgetown. They would leave around 6, 8 in the morning. They would get down to Georgetown at noontime, because everything was horse and buggy. My grandfather said that Change Bridge Road was a chain bridge. He told me that it was a chain bridge. I was like, well, weren't you scared, to swing back? And he said, yeah, they were scared. But he said they would get down to Georgetown, sell their wares, and then once they sold their wares around 4 or 5 o'clock, they would head back to Vienna. They wouldn't get back to Vienna until about 10, 11 o'clock at night. So, and that was doing, and it was dirt roads, and probably around here was probably dirt roads like everywhere else in Fairfax County.
They didn't take those chains off till the 60s.
Huh?
They didn't take those chains off till the 60s. When I was a kid and we would leave the house to go into town to visit my cousin, it was still a chain bridge. So I remember going across the chains. They didn't make a concrete bridge until the 60s.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow.
It was chains.
Yeah.
You had to be careful on icy and snow days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, can I add to what you were just saying? Is that okay? I just wanted to, talking about sort of why different communities sort of are, Fairfax also has a disproportionate, still has, but had a disproportionate amount of restricted covenants, right? I mean, everybody's heard of redlining, where it's specifically written into deeds that only white families could live, or only white non-Jewish non-Armenian families could live. Fairfax has a disproportionate amount of those for the region and even for the country. And what's really interesting is those restricted covenants are not only on houses, but a lot of them are also on entire neighborhoods, and they still exist. And the reason why they're not enforceable is because of the Fair Housing Act, right? So they're there, but people don't pay any attention to them because right now they don't matter as long as the Fair Housing Act is where it is. That said, what's really interesting is a lot of people don't know that they exist. So they're still there, and that's what has shaped the country, but Fairfax County and the neighborhoods here and the regions here, but they're also still there, and a lot of people don't even know that they're still there. You have to actively, you have to essentially rewrite and have your deed re-recorded if you want that restricted covenant to be released from your home.
So it's not illegal. The deed has to be re-recorded?
It still has to be re-recorded. So as long as the Fair Housing Act stands where it is and is unchanged, it's essentially unenforceable, it's moot, and it doesn't matter. But if you wanted to proactively, let's say for example, if the Fair Housing Act were somehow eliminated, those restricted covenants could actually be enforceable again. So a lot of people want to go remove those, but you have to get your deed rewritten. You have to get the neighborhood's deed rewritten, or the neighborhood's sort of restrictions rewritten sometimes if that's in place. So it's a really interesting, I know that's not the point of what we're talking about today, but it is really interesting how disproportionate Fairfax is. There's a pretty long, I'm not an expert on it, I just have talked to people who are. There's a long history of very active work to put those restricted covenants in place through the early to mid 1900s.
So when you see that covenant name, because I actually saw this the other day, a friend of mine asked me what that meant. There was a covenant, this community covenant doesn't mean what I agree. That's how I thought. So I was like, I had no idea. So
Yeah.
Just brought that up.
Yeah, and I guess I should point out, a covenant is just a contract. So, I don't know which ones are still exist and which ones are out there. Like I said, but there's deed restrictions on houses that disappear, and there's a lot of homes.
Most of it is that people have gone and done the research and found out. I'll put a link to the materials that you send you after the seminar. If you put your email on the sign-up sheet, very legibly, you get a lot of stuff. Including there's just a lot of research coming out recently, but it explains why after that now where land was sold and moved off a lot of land, and then a lot of that land was deed restricted by the subdividers. So it only was come out and live there and live good. And that's why the population is falling.
And because of commercialization, like I said, Maryfield, if you look at Maryfield, how commercialized it is. We've got Rosé District, the name of everything. But that used to be the Maryfield movie theater. And it was a drive-in movie theater at the time.
Was it a Mount Falls church?
Yeah, did you see the slide?
I thought you just walked.
Oh, okay, yeah. Tennehill is still there, and James Lee is still there. And Tennehill usually have a festival every year. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. They have a festival every year, and it's raised on, I think they're a nonprofit organization. Yeah. Any other? All right, and so the next slide talks about home ownership by race from 1930 to 2023. If you notice in this slide how in 1930 that 49% of whites owned their homes and 24% of blacks. And that was because of racial discrimination, because of, due to slavery, also Jim Crow. Back then also they wouldn't allow blacks to actually get home loans, like white folks could get home loans and stuff. They were restricted because it was when they put in the FHA loan through the federal government. If you were in a certain type of job, you wasn't able to get the FHA loan. So say, because most black people were working domestic jobs, maybe, some see that it came down a little bit, and most of that is probably because of COVID. And because COVID had stopped a lot of people from buying homes and everything at that point in time. So that was the reason why I think that probably went down, because of COVID. And so the next slide looks at different races, like the white, black, and Asian, and Hispanic races. So if you look at the red line, how we slightly went up in home ownership, and then the Hispanic community is over 51%, and then the Asian community is much higher. And then if you look at the white community, they've gone up as well, but not as much. I think probably the Hispanic community probably went a lot higher than the Asian community to buy a home. And this is 2025. This is a snapshot that I got from the National Association of Realtors. It says that 45% of blacks own their homes now, which is still low. I think for us, it should be a little bit more higher. It should be over 50%, but it isn't. Because if you look at the other groups, you see how the home ownership rate for them is much higher than for African Americans and blacks. And the next slide I have down here is generational home buying and selling. So if you look at the kind of light blue line, that's the buyer, and the dark blue line, that's the seller. And you notice how this is highlighted, saying that older boomers and younger boomers are the ones that are buying the homes instead of millennials. But it's so expensive. For young people, it's very disappointing that, when I was growing up, you could actually buy, you could buy a home, the next generation could buy a home. Nowadays, it's very difficult for a young generation to buy a home because it's so expensive, and especially here in Douglas County. And I know Mary and I have been, on the housing committee talking about how we can help people to actually move into homes and things like that. And me being a realtor, if you want to buy a home, I'll help you. We'll find something. There's something for everybody, as they say. And then the next one talks about wealth inequality. Of course, you know that African American households wealth is not as, net worth is not as high as white net worth. And that's because of, generational inequality, not being able to buy a home, or they devalue your home. I know that's been happening too in the appraisal industry. I don't know if anybody heard about that, but the appraisal industry is devaluing African American homes, and then when they have like a white friend or a white neighbor, they take down all the pictures and stuff, then it's a different story. And we shouldn't be having that going on right now. We're in the 21st century. We should be beyond all of that. That's what I would say. We should be on a lot of this stuff, but it's still going on. Yeah, we are. We're in reverse now. We're going. I always tell people it's going to make me feel like we're going back to the 1950s. So you can see this how substantial it is. This probably is about 1.1 million difference in net worth. That's substantial. How they never gave us the opportunity to have generational wealth and wealth in this country. And then the next one talks about the share of wealth, which is almost similar to the other, just telling you that white households as a total have 66%, whereas black households have a total of 11%. And then if you look at proportion, it's 85% for white households have wealth and 3% of black households. And that includes your home, stocks, bonds, and all the other stuff. I don't know how much, most people, can afford to invest because it takes money. And a lot of people don't have extra change or extra money, discretionary money to spend on, extra things. They're just trying to live in their home, enjoy their home, and survive. And the next one I'm getting into is credit scores and mortgages. So the FICO score, what it is, it grades you on whether you're credit worthy. And it depends on them the minimum. They say send $5, because that helps your credit. You know, they say send $10, just the minimum. It may take a long time for you to get where you're going, but at least your credit is staying in a credit-worthy position. Because that helps when you start to buy a home and everything. Because they do look at your credit. That's the one thing they do look at, your credit. Your income and your credit. And also they look at, when you're buying a home, they also look at, and I tell people, if you're buying a home, don't buy anything. Wait until you get in the home, sign the contract, you buy anything you want. Don't buy anything before you sign the contract. Because if you sign the contract, one time it didn't go against you, but today it does. So if you go out and buy a car, and they go in and they look at your, because they're gonna look at your credit before you actually sign the contract. And they find out you buy this home, that's gonna go against you too. So you may not be able to get in at home because now you want something that you probably shouldn't have bought. Always tell my clients, don't buy anything, nothing. Wait until you sign the contract and get into your home, and you buy your car or whatever furniture or appliances or whatever you want to buy. Because you don't want your credit to stop you from buying a home.
What happens when you pay your cash purchase?
That's fine too.
How does that affect your credit? People who pay your cash purchase,
Is that for your home?
how does it rank as far as your credit is concerned? If you're purchasing everything, cars, house, whatever.
That may go against you somewhat because of the fact that you pay cash, you haven't established your credit yet. I tell people if they want to establish credit, get a gas card. If you drive, get a gas card. Or if you don't drive, get a, secure loan. Secure loan, you put certain money down, and that is building up your credit. So, when you do that, you know, like I say, one, get a secure credit card, or two, get a gas card, drive. And sometimes you get department credit cards too. I know they're very expensive, but that helps too. As long as you pay on it on time, even if it's, like I tell people, even if it's just a minimum, you're building your credit. And the next slide goes into the FICO scores, and here are the scores. You can see up there what the range is. The minimum is 620 to if you want to get into a home. So I always tell people to, not only they tell people to pull their credit report, that's fine, but you need to know what your score is. So you know what you need to work with. So if your score is like, okay, for my score was one time really, really bad. I mean, I was like in the 500 range. It has taken me a long time to get myself out of the 500 range, and now I'm in the 600 range. But, you know, like I say, over time, if you pay on your credit card or pay on your bill on time, because I know now, I don't know if anybody heard that now they're going after student loan debt. And so, you know, if you can, I always tell people that also, if you're falling into financial trouble, call your credit card company, call the financial institution that you're having the trouble with, and talk to them. They'll work with you. Some of them will work with you and try to help you along in the process. Like I had a student loan, and I got laid off. I had called the student loan company. They deferred my student loan for a long time. I mean, I still had to pay on it, but they deferred it on the back end. But I eventually paid it off. It took me 20 years to pay off the student loan, but I eventually paid it off. So, you know, it takes time to do everything, but, you know, it's worth it if you want to try to get into a home. You know. And also tell people, if you have extra money, try to save some money, because that helps too. You know, have a rainy day fund or have a fund that you want to save to buy a home. Because I always tell people, if you're gonna, buy a home, put a deposit of $5,000. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but they will accept $5,000.
$5,000?
At least.
At least?
Yeah.
Now, is that in addition to the various first-time home buyer programs that are available in
Yes,
Fairfax
you could.
County?
Yes.
Okay, so you can combine it? Or?
Yes. Anybody has any questions? I know I get called and ran
Am I-
and a whole bunch of other stuff.
You might have a slide coming up answering this, but you have a median income, average income of the, I guess, typical middle class home buyer that's required for a longer. In your experience, what is the typical income that a person has now?
I think the last couple I had, I think they made around 100,000. But before that, the couple that I had before that, they made 70,000.
Okay. Thank you.
All in him. But like I said, the couple that I had, that had bought down in this area. And it was really surprising that homes down in this area were a little bit less expensive than being out where I am. And, now that they're in their home, that home now is worth over 500,000, probably 550 at this point. They bought that home for under 500,000, and that was well over 500,000. And this area is,
If you go to the bank and basically have to go, I mean, some people still own the bank if they get out of their house. Don't you, if you not also now, you go and take over that loan for that house.
no,
Yeah.
they're not gonna allow, they cannot allow you to do that.
But they do, if the house is on, you know.
If it's on the market, yes.
They will let you take over.
Well, you gotta go through the process of showing your income, showing your credit, see if you can afford the home, that type of thing.
Okay, so that's basically like a new house, right? So basically, you're saying that the loans and, you understand, I understand. But what I don't understand is that if I get like I have people calling me for housing, and I'm sitting there like, okay, cool, I would like to have a house.
Right.
Yes, I have the money, but, yeah, I was like, I rather have up to be fixing up a house.
Right.
Than me getting a brand new house.
Okay, so you're talking about a rehab.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes, you can buy rehabs. There are rehabs out there that
A lot of them.
yeah, people go buy and fix them up and they'll either rent them or they'll sell them.
Yes, I rather have something like that, because my credit is bad or whatever, as long as I get $5,000.
Now, I think FHA has a 203B loan.
Yeah.
Does anybody know what that is? That's a loan you can get from FHA and it'll help you rehab a house. Say for instance, back when they had, the housing crisis. A lot of people bought homes and they took a 203B loan where they fixed up the home. And they call them rehab homes. And because a lot of times, back during the housing crisis, people had taken everything out of the house, the carpet, the pipes, the appliances. I mean, the house was literally bare bones. They had taken down the cabinets, everything. The house was just the house, shell the house. And people had to fix up those homes when they bought them. And just saying this to you all, I don't know how true it is, but if we go in the direction we're going in now, we're going to be in a housing crisis again because people are being laid off. A lot of people are losing their jobs. And, we thought we were going to have a lot of houses on the market. A lot of people have decided not to sell. A lot of people say they're going to stay in their home as long as they possible. And so now is at the point where is what's going to happen when the money runs out, because a lot of people are now taking the buyout, which they get funding until I think it's September. And then what are people going to do with that money? Because there's going to be houses that are going to come up market. So there's going to be a lot. And also there's going to be a lot of students that's going to default on their loans too, and that's also going to be a crisis. So we're looking at two crises.
So are you predicting somewhat that September and after September might be a good time to look for those foreclosures.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, but then people are not gonna be able to afford to stay, especially here in this area. You know, because, like I said, I grew up here, and when I was growing up, there was nothing the federal government job. That was it. There was no private industry or anything like that. Everybody worked for the federal government. And now, you know, the Reagan came in, people wanted private industry, so now that's why we have all these private industry jobs. But, you know, people in office, he's laying off a lot of people, and now he's talking about laying off more people. And he's also talking about closing the CFPD department, which is a Consumer Financial Protection Agency. And that's protecting you against lenders that wanna overcharge you, you know, banks that, you know, fraud you, you know, that type of thing. And he wants to get rid of that, you know, like everything that wanna help the people, he wants to get rid of. So,
I have a question.
okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay. Also is the loan denial rate, which is, if you can see here, between black and white, back in the early 2000s, that was when we had our home loan crisis. And you see it today, hasn't changed very much, we're still being denied twice the rate as whites. And then if you go to the next slide, you see the denial rate by whites, 11%, whites, 21%. You see, black people been denied 21%, that's all. And then Asians 9% and Hispanic 17%. So the next one talks about millennial ownership. How many millennials we have in here? Any millennials? Back here. Okay, we're talking about, you know, homeownership for blacks in the early 2000s, 2008 it was 15%, 33% for whites, and now it's 32% for blacks and 65% for whites. There's still a gap. I don't know how we can close the gap, but we gotta figure out something. And then we look at homeowners insurance. We find out that blacks pay more homeowners insurance than the other races. So, yeah. And then we talk about, you know, I talked about, you know, homeowners insurance, the differences, races, which African Americans pay $60 higher than Hispanics, $50 higher than white homeowners, and $30 higher than Asian owners.
Question.
Yes.
Do they determine that because of the certain geographic location of the home, or do they determine that? How do they know?
I think they base it on probably like city areas and areas where there's, you know, more black. They think that, you know, homes are valued less. They look at the crime, the poverty, and all the other stuff, you know. So they're looking at those things. I don't know, you know, I tried to find what the racial makeup here in Fairfax County as far as homeowners insurance. I couldn't find anything online, but I'd love to know myself what most African Americans are paying for homeowners insurance.
It's called code. It's called code. Code is what they have written around.
Yeah. And here's the advantage of homeownership versus renting. Renting is a flexibility to move wherever you want without penalty after the lease ends. Same monthly payment for 1 year, the monthly payment increases. Landlord handles all major repairs and covers expenses. But that's not true. That statement is not true. I can tell you for a fact that nowadays that if you are a renter, you do have a deductible. It goes from anywhere from $75 deductible to $120. But they pay for all major repairs. That's true. They pay for all major repairs. So if your any appliances break down, the heating system break down, the landlord pays for it. And landlord can raise the rent or sell the property, which is true. That happens in some of those I know. And homeownership provides a sense of stability, helps build equity. Yes, it does. Because I know someone, my daughter has a neighbor that next door that moved into their home and they had a crisis. Their home had valued more than my daughter's home when my daughter went through the financial crisis back in 2007. So, for all repairs and maintenance, including costs of sense of stability in the community, requires a large amount of financial leverage, and homeowners can stand to make or lose a lot of money as housing prices rise or fall, and that's true too. You know, when it's a seller's market, sellers make a lot of money. But when it's a buyer's market, it's advantage to the buyer. Which means that the seller can't get everything he wants, or he or she wants out of their home. And so, that's the end. Anybody have any questions?
I do have a question.
Anybody want to know?
I have a quick question for you. So, if you're saying that after September there'll be potentially be more foreclosures on the market, and there's a potentially that the Consumer Protection Agency may close, is it really an ideal time if the buyers won't have that type of protection against predatory lending? It's hard to tell.
Well, I know in the state of Virginia, it's caveat emptor, buyer beware. Anybody knows about that one? Yeah, that's what the state motto is, caveat emptor. That you the buyer is at your own risk. And we had that before we had consumer protection money. I mean, a lot of us have been around for a long time. No, I shouldn't say that. I mean, but some of us been around before we had protection, correct? So, I mean, you know,
Speaking of lending discrimination, I think we should move into a session from the people, right? Senator, should we come down? Is it okay if we do one time and then?
Yeah, perfect.
all right, so I'm gonna, does he need this?
I got another question for you, ma'am. So, when you look at a listing and say short sale or auction, should you stay away from that, or?
It all depends. If you know, because back during the 2008 crisis, we had a lot of those.
Okay.
And I've noticed that, and you probably found that out, a lot of corporations were buying them.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
Right.
I think, you know, I always tell people, we should have a law that first bid should go to a homeowner rather than a corporation. That's just me, you know.
There is a bill actually in general assembly.
Oh, it is a bill in
Yeah,
general
yeah.
assembly? Oh, I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah.
I was like, I tell people all the time, they're taking away from people that actually want to buy a home.
Right.
And, we're making it more expensive. That people can't afford to buy them. And that shouldn't happen. There are people that want to live in a home, not a corporation that lives somewhere in a big home, you know, maybe 10, 15 miles from where they bought the home.
Right.
It should be somebody that actually want to live in the community.
But that short sale auction, you're dealing with the bank, I assume.
Right, and you're doing it at your own risk, because a lot of times when you go to these auctions, they may have, you know, they may or may not have where you could actually move the home.
Right, okay.
So you're doing it, sometimes you're doing it at your own risk. And sometimes they will have like a one-day open house.
Right.
Where you can come in and look at the property and see if you would actually want to bid on it. The, Fairfax County do have an auction. I forgot when it happens, but they do have an auction where they auction off homes and stuff too. At the courthouse in Fairfax.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
exact same question, he's looking for a one-bedroom unit. And this time, the leasing agent says, sorry, we don't have any vacant one-bedrooms right now. And so, that is really, kind of the heart of civil rights testing, because if a person went into the leasing office on their own and were told, there's no vacant units, that could be true. They might have no way of knowing that someone else is being told that there are units available, right? But by doing this, by creating those profiles and matching people up, we can tell that really clearly discrimination is what's happening. The federal law that gives us these housing protections against discrimination is the Fair Housing Act. It was passed in 1968. We also have state and local protection. I'll get to those in a second. But the Fair Housing Act is really broad. It applies to all kinds of housing-related transactions. Obviously, we're talking about sales and lending today, but it applies also to rentals, homeowner associations, insurance, really any kind of housing-related transaction. And the Federal Fair Housing Act protects against discrimination based on these 7 protected classes. So it's illegal to discriminate based on race, color, national origin, disability, religion, familial status, that refers to if you have children under the age of 18, and sex, which is a little up in the air as to whether it includes gender identity and sexual orientation on the federal level, but thankfully Virginia does specifically protect against those. So here at least, discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is illegal as well. Virginia has a couple more protected classes. Elderliness, source of funds refers to how you make your money. So in renting, we see discrimination based on someone having a housing voucher. That's a pretty common form of discrimination, but in Virginia it is illegal. It could also refer to getting, supplemental security income, things like that. And military status is protected as well. And then finally, in Fairfax County, marital status is a protected class. So if someone says, I don't feel good about giving you this loan because I prefer to lend to a couple, something like that, that would be discrimination protected under the marital status provision. So that's who's protected by these laws, and then the prohibited activities refers to what it is illegal to do. So to sell, if someone refuses to sell or rent to you based on any of those protected classes, race, religion, disability, etc., that's illegal. Discriminatory terms and conditions, so that would mean, based on your race or your religion, creating different rules for you. So saying to the white tester, for example, this loan has this interest rate, and saying to the black tester, this loan has this other interest rate. That would be a discriminatory term or condition. It's illegal to advertise a discriminatory preference. It's illegal to misrepresent availability. That's what we saw in that video earlier. Blockbusting is a term that mostly comes from the 60s. It's not happening much anymore, but it referred to when real estate agents would go into white neighborhoods. They would say, I just heard that there's a black family moving in. They would stoke these fears of, these racist fears, and then they would swoop in, buy the houses because the white families would want to move out, and then they would sell those houses for more than they were worth. The black families would move in. That's illegal. Steering is illegal. That refers to directing someone to a certain neighborhood or even to a certain unit within a building and not giving them the full scope of options. I'm going to talk about that one more in depth because that's one we see commonly when it comes to home buying. So steering is illegal as well. Harassment, inaccessible design. This refers to, for people with disabilities, there are certain standards that housing has to conform to, and if it doesn't, that's protected under the Fair Housing Act. Retaliation, so let's say you file a fair housing complaint against a real estate agent, for example, and then they retaliate against you, that would be illegal. And like I said, the Fair Housing Act is broad, so it actually includes language if you said, hey, this is the one community I want to look in, and they show you homes there, that's your prerogative. But in this case, what I'm referring to is if they are doing that without your guidance. So that second example is an example of that as well, showing homes to a black buyer only in black neighborhoods. And then this can get sneaky as well. So sometimes real estate agents will use coded language in order to steer clients. So talking about schools or crime in this kind of veiled attempt to signal the racial makeup of a neighborhood. Here's an example from a real study that was done on Long Island in New York. And this real estate agent here is telling the tester, only the white tester, you don't want to have Brentwood School District, you want to have Bayshore School District. So she's telling the tester, based on the characters of the school, you actually don't want to live in this neighborhood, you want to live in this neighborhood. And crucially, that was not told to the black tester, right? So this real estate agent is making assumptions that this white tester is not going to want to live in this area with a higher concentration of black people. They want to live in this better school district. But that same information about the quality of the schools is not given to the black tester. Lending is another place where discrimination can happen. This is, nationwide, and in Virginia, borrowers of color are more likely to be targeted for less competitive mortgage offers than white borrowers are. And this is something we've corroborated with our civil rights testing. So when we send black testers and white testers to banks to inquire about mortgages, we find that sometimes the white borrowers are given more competitive offers. And there's another type of steering where it doesn't have to do with steering you into a neighborhood, but steering you towards certain loan products. We found that black buyers can sometimes be steered towards loans with less favorable terms. So for example, higher interest rates, things like that. And that would be illegal as well. There's also, I talked about discriminatory terms and conditions. That can come into lending as well. So maybe the bank is really kind of interrogating you about the documentation you provided. They want, extra documentation, proof of income, things that they're only requiring of you and not requiring of, the white buyer, for example. Obviously, if you're just going to a bank on your own, you're not going to know what they're requiring of other buyers. But this is just to say, if you feel something fishy going on, contact us and we can conduct that investigation. That was an example, the last slide, of some disability-related discrimination, right? So if they want proof of your supplemental income. Discrimination can also happen based on pregnancy or gender. And so we've seen banks refuse to approve loan applications for mothers until they return from maternity or parental leave. We've seen less favorable terms based on maternity and parental leave. Here's a real-life example of someone who went on maternity leave, and her mortgage insurance company refused to sign off on her loan until she returned to work. That would be illegal. And then this is something that Ms. Carter discussed briefly earlier, about appraisals. So this is a real-life story about someone named Carla Duffy. She tried to refinance her home 5 years ago. She got an appraisal that was well below what she believed her home was worth. She believed it was worth about $185,000. The appraisal came in at $125,000. She said, something's not right. I want to order another appraisal. That one came even lower. She said, something's really not right now. So what she did was she had her white friend pose as the home buyer. She ordered a third appraisal. She hid all of her own, pictures, anything that shows that again, I'm not saying that if you're getting an appraisal, you should have to go through all of these steps to get an accurate appraisal. But if it comes in lower than you're expecting, again, that could be a sign that discrimination is happening. That might be you can report to the DRC. This is just kind of spelling that out again. So it could be related to the neighborhood you're in. It could be related to your race as a homeowner, anything like that. And then the second to last thing I want to talk about is HOAs. So even once you've bought your condo, house, whatever it is, if there's a condo association or a homeowners association, discrimination can still occur. And what that can look like is not allowing a tenant to reserve an accessible parking space. That would be disability-based discrimination. It could be only enforcing noise regulations against families with children and not other families. That would be familial status discrimination. There are lots of different ways that this can occur. The key thing, though, is it's based on your membership in a protected class. So one of those things I mentioned at the beginning: race, religion, disability, national origin, etc. Last thing is, so now that we know how to identify discrimination, what can we do about it? You can report it to the Equal Rights Center. I'm going to pass out some resources in just a minute that have our information on them. And there are a few different things we can do. One is advocate on your behalf to the housing provider, the mortgage lender, whoever it is. We can say, hey, we think what's happening here is illegal. I think we should revisit the appraisal you did or whatever it was. And sometimes that's enough to get them to realize that someone's watching and they should be better about their practices. Sometimes that's not enough, and we can assist you with filing a housing discrimination complaint. And what that is kind of a more official path towards rectifying the situation. That complaint can be filed with a local or state agency. It can also be filed with HUD. I'm not going to recommend HUD at the moment, but in theory it can be filed with HUD as well. If you are a person with a disability, we can also assist you with submitting a reasonable accommodation request. Reasonable accommodations are things like what I mentioned earlier about a parking space reserved for you, or maybe you're in a community that says no pets, but you have a service animal. Things like that are reasonable accommodations. We can assist you with that. And then the last thing, of course, is we can conduct civil rights testing. So if you say, hey, this mortgage lender, I'm getting shady vibes from them, maybe you don't have the evidence that discrimination is occurring, but you think it is, tell us and we can investigate using that method I mentioned earlier, civil rights testing. So that's our information there. I'll be passing out those resources, like I said, as well. And really, I want the takeaway to be, just be on the lookout. Discrimination obviously shouldn't be happening anymore, but it unfortunately really is. And it's getting more subtle in a lot of ways, so it's harder to see. But be on the lookout. We can help you if you encounter it. And that's the presentation. I'll take any questions. Yes, right here.
So in the current climate, how effective is your organization now and in the next 4 years?
Yeah, so thankfully a lot of the protections we have on the federal level, we have on the state level as well. And so that's what I was talking about earlier. We can file a complaint, for example, with the Virginia Fair Housing Office instead of HUD. We can, file with HUD depending on if we want to. Right now, we want to less. And so we have the same kind of enforcement mechanism locally. So thankfully, we've still been able to see a good amount of success. Yeah. Okay.
Why don't the banks have to disclose all of the documentation that they need prior to one even coming into the door?
Yeah, good question. There's not that law on the books. It would be great if there were. So what we found, or sometimes what we found is even if they do disclose all the documentation they need at the door, they come back and say, oh, we forgot about this, right? And so that's a big, well, maybe not, right? That's a big red flag that they're actually not requiring that of everyone. So, and that's what I mean by it's hard to tell for if they're doing it to everyone. And it's really hard for an individual person to tell if they're doing it to everyone. But that's a big red flag. Thanks for bringing that up. If they say this is what we need, and then they change that answer, it's definitely fishy. So that would be something you could report to us. Question here?
Is there a list of agencies that you guys have investigated in the past that maybe you don't recommend people to go to, or vice versa? Agencies that are sort of in compliance and do things really well that you would encourage someone to go to?
Good question. We don't have that list, mostly because when we investigate, sometimes that results in a lawsuit. A lot of times that settlement will expire, after a certain number of years, and so we can't guarantee that they'll still be in compliance. We could hope, but we don't want to endorse and then find out that they're actually not. We'll test again, every 5 years or so, but it's a little dangerous to make that endorsement, and we can't say for sure that they're sticking up to their end of the bargain. Question over here, and then I'll come back to you, sir.
I was just going to comment on this question about documentation, because there is that element of discovery. So it may be, you give them everything, not saying it's work, but sometimes you discover something once you see that documentation. So it needs more clarity. But like you're saying, they should be requiring that of everyone in the same situation. That's a lot of the discovery is what sometimes opens up like a can and you end up.
Right.
I forgot my question.
No worries, I'll be sticking around, so if it comes back to you, feel free to ask. And I'm just going to pass out this.
Oh, I remember the question.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So, a lot of our organizations like yours exist to protect us or sort of defend us after the fact.
Sure.
And I love that. NAACP is one of them. I'm board with it. However, what can we do to ensure that we're not discriminated against before the fact?
So that's why we'll do the civil rights testing like I was talking about. We'll do that, in response to someone's complaint, or we'll just do that on our own. And so that's one of the best ways we have to kind of proactively seek out discrimination and then stop it when we find it.
So do you have a list of friendly guys that you already tested?
Like I said, no, because if we test and we don't find discrimination, they could change their policies a month later and start discriminating again, right? So we don't want to endorse without being able to, certify. We would have to be testing them like every week, right, to make sure that they're still not discriminating. So it's unfortunately a little difficult to create that list. You can check out our press releases and see who we have sued. But again, I can't promise that things haven't changed since then.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Sorry. Because I know a lot of this process is sort of reactionary. So how long takes a process? Like from the moment that a complaint is filed, sort of going through the motions of the investigation and getting somewhere? Because in a market like ours now, and with things being so turbulent, I can't help but wonder, the complainant having to wait and how dangerous just waiting can be with everything, interest levels.
Absolutely. So I mentioned we have a couple different kind of remedies, one of them being advocacy. So let's say you suspect discrimination and you can provide even just a little bit of evidence, right? You say, they quoted me this rate, but then when I went in person, they changed that rate, right? Maybe they didn't know your rates, and then when you went in person, they started changing things. That would be something you can report to us, and then we would get in contact with them and say, this is fishy, don't make us sue you. And sometimes that fear of being sued is enough to get them to change their policies. That can happen pretty quickly. If it gets to the point of filing a complaint, that is going to take longer. At that point, the remedy we're trying to get for you is not necessarily getting the longer, but I'm going to say that'll take a year minimum to get resolved because of the way that process works and the investigation and the mediation and all of that. All right, and if anyone else comes up with any more questions after the presentations are over, just let me know, and I'll do my best to answer. And if you think of any questions after today, just give us a call at that number. All right, thank you. Do not forget my computer.
Okay, that was great. Now we're getting closer and closer to home, and we're gonna find out what's going on with Fairfax County, what kind of options, opportunities that we have for, finding out about homes for sale and preparing for loans. Maybe one of those homes. So we're gonna hear about that. So the candidates who before, Jeffrey Alexander, who works with housing and community development.
Thank you, Mary. I really appreciate it. I think this will go away. So as Mary said, my name is Gentry Alexander. I'm the Division Director of the Homeownership Division of Fairfax County and my Department of Housing and Community Development. So going to do a couple of things today, and I'm going to go relatively quickly, both because I have limited time, and also I want to save a couple minutes for y'all. All that to say, I've got my information here as well, so what I'm going to do is a couple different things. I want to talk a little bit about what the county is doing and the programs that we have, and then I want to talk a little bit about other resources that are available to you. Mary will have the presentation and we'll distribute it to you as well. So a lot of this is going to be sort of a slide kind of concept that I'll go quickly through a few different things that I want to share with you. I will also stick around, but consider this sort of a primer on what resources might be available to you to help you get started and help you continue your journey and your search as you're thinking about buying.
Well, you have your own soapbox, so we go over a little bit. You won't have to go out to me.
Fair enough. That makes me worry a little bit about what happens after we actually get it out. I do want to talk just briefly about buying a home. Dee obviously covered this really, really well. But if there's only one takeaway from today, from my part of this presentation, is to work with a trusted partner. Dee would be one of those. So listed second here would be a real estate agent, a licensed realtor, someone who both knows the area and also knows what's available. Really important to work with someone that you trust, to work with someone who knows your community and who knows the communities that you want to live in. The other two that I put on here, the third one actually was lenders. So working with a trusted lender, you don't necessarily have to work with the first lender that you go to. So it's really important as you're thinking about buying a house, work with a lender that you're comfortable with. So make sure that you feel that level of comfort that you find someone that you are comfortable with. Often a real estate agent can help you find a trusted lender. They often have really, really good partnerships. And then also there are a couple of different resources for lenders that I'll share with you before we're done. And then the last one that I put first actually is HUD certified housing counselors. Is anyone familiar with this, with the housing counselors? So there's a certification process through HUD that housing counselors will go through, and there are organizations in the community, including here, where they offer a broad range of housing counseling services for free. One of those services would be homeownership and talking about what it looks like to buy a house. But there are also a number of other things that they will work with you on. They can talk about credit repair, they can talk about rental assistance if that's something that you're looking for. These certified housing counselors are really, really excellent resources, and I'm going to share the link and how you can find this certified counselor. I believe one is participating Fairfax County has a lot of different resources. We do emergency housing, we do rental housing and rental assistance. We process housing choice vouchers that use phone call subsidy, for both rental assistance, but also for homeownership assistance, and we can use vouchers for that. Then we also have an office for government. So, I'm just gonna go back. I'm going to briefly share the programs that the county has. So it requires a bit of an introduction. Most importantly, that our resources are limited. What we do is very specific and very limited. So one of the things that we talk about a lot every day, in fact, is how do we expand our efforts? How do we move into other parts of the county? How do we make sure that we're best serving our population? So what I'm going to share in terms of what Fairfax does currently is very specific. But again, I want you to know that we work a lot about what else we can do, what is available as well. And that's also why I'm going to share other resources for you too. The other recommendation that I have is Fairfax County has one set of programs that I strongly recommend looking into, but it's best to go as broad as you can in terms of looking at all of the different resources that are out there, all the different programs that are available, because there are statewide programs, nationwide programs, which are lenders that have programs, and the more that you can sort of reach out. We talked a minute ago about combining some of those resources, almost all of them can be combined with other assistance. So it's a really good idea to look at everything that's out there. That's what Fairfax does. What we have is called affordable dwelling units. So if you've ever looked into our information on ADUs, these affordable dwelling units are essentially set aside when a new development is built. Or if a building is rehabbed and has certain number of units, a certain percentage of those have to be set aside for affordable housing. So some of those will go to rental and some of them go to homeownership. So what I do specifically is I work with these affordable dwelling units. So these are both new homes and resold homes. If you purchase one of the homes, when you decide to sell, it actually gets sold to someone else also at an affordable rate. Right? So we try to keep that in house for the units once those developments are built. It's for first-time home buyers. It's up to 70% of what's called the area median income. I'm actually going to show you what that is in just a moment. But there's a determination of what sort of the median income is in the area. Half of the households are above that, half of the households are below that. And when we talk about things like low income or low moderate income or income eligibility, those are almost always based on that area median. I'll show you that chart in just a second. The other thing that's important to know about the Fairfax programs is we have what's called control pricing, and it's a limited equity program. So the trade-off for having an affordable home that can also be resold to someone else at an affordable rate is that the equity is limited. The reason why this is important is we actually have some people who choose not to participate in our program because there are some very specific limitations when you buy one of our units. One of them is this limited equity. That means that if you bought a home, let's say for $200,000 through our program, in 10 years, you may only be able to sell it for something like $230 or $240, where the market may have gone up more than that. Okay? And there's a calculation that we use. It's based on the consumer price index, which is sort of tied to inflation. So sometimes it goes out more than others. You do get some equity, but it's very limited. And so a lot of people are very excited to be able to live in one of our homes. But a lot of people, like I said, choose not to pursue the Fairfax County specific programs because you're limited with the equity that you can earn. Again, the trade-off is that the home is affordable for hopefully for as long as you live in it, and also for the next person that lives in it as well. Very quickly, just a couple of other eligibility notes on our affordable dwelling units. It is for first-time home buyers. We do have minimum household income. We want to make sure that you can afford to live in a house. And so there are a couple other pieces that go into that as well. We already talked about the credit score of 620. We do make sure that you can bring some of your own money to pay for part of the down payment. So again, part of getting homeownership ready is having savings, not just to make the purchase, but so we say you have to have at least $1 million so this is the majority of what we do here in Fairfax County, but we do have another set of properties that goes up to 120%. So there are other income levels. I'm showing you this as again, as sort of a primer. But if you are interested and you think you might qualify, even if you're above this, you still may fall into some of our other categories. They essentially look the same. It's just that the eligibility is a little higher in terms of income, and the prices are a little higher as well. I see you raised your hand, and I wonder if did I answer your question?
You answered it.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have seen driving around Fairfax County new builds starting at $700,000. Would you have a dwelling in that location, in that neighborhood?
We often do. Again, it depends on how many units are built, it depends on the type of development that it is, but it is through the zoning and the ordinances. It's required for certain developments. And so often when you see that, it's starting at the 700s, we will have units there, but the reason why those aren't advertised, well, there's a few different reasons, but one of them is that the sale of those units that are affordable have to go through our programs. So we work on the back end, we work really closely with developers. We make sure that they not only set aside those units, but when we talk about fairness and equity and quality, you can't put all of the affordable units in one corner of the first floor of the building or the basement level. You can't use substantially lesser materials. So when you're giving everybody else, really high quality, you can't build a real shoddy unit and then call it an affordable unit. So there's a lot of other things on the back end. But the short answer to your question is probably. It's just that it would be listed through our programs and sold through our process.
I have a question.
Yes.
How long do you have to be a part of your program? For example, the NACA program, that's like a 2-year program, it's an education course. I think with the HUD certified, I think you have to go through a class too. Is that a similar process that you have to go through a class?
It is. We don't have a length of time like that, although they really love what they do as well. But we do have steps that you have to follow. So on our website, we have the list of all of those. The very first one is we have an orientation. It's kind of similar to this, but it's an hour long where we talk about the ins and outs of our program. We talk about some more of these sort of requirements that you have to make sure that you meet. Just make sure that we set the right expectation. Again, some people choose not to proceed after they learn about our program because they don't want to have that limited equity, or one of the other requirements is you have to live in the home as your primary residence. So that means if you move out in 10 years and want to rent out your home, you can't do that with us, right? So we do an orientation. There's Virginia Housing offers one, and we actually require that one as well. But Virginia Housing's orientation is really excellent as well. I'll share some of those resources in a second. They do some really incredible work both in affordability and also just in education. And then even with our programs, even at the end before you purchase, we do one more orientation because it's just that important to make sure that you understand. So I had a conversation yesterday, and one of the sort of comments that came up was someone was surprised about how many documents they had to sign when they bought. Your hand gets tired and all these things. So if you're going to do that process, if you know someone who's going to do that, that's the thing. So we make sure that all of the process is clear, the requirements are clear before someone moves into that final step.
I have one last question. Is there a long waiting list for it? I heard it was like 5 years or so.
That's a good question. It's hard to put a timeline on it. We do have different preference points. So I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but what happens is once you submit your application to us and you get approved, then we sort of put you into pre-approved. We give you what we call a passport to homeownership. And so that essentially makes you eligible to apply for any unit that we see that you're interested in. So some people apply for every unit that they're eligible for. Some people are looking very specifically for one type of home or one area of the county. But you can kind of pick and choose once you have that pre-approved. We have a fairly long
Is income net gross? What do we define as income?
It's a great question. It is gross income. And so that's going to be before taxes, before expenses, or anything else. There's a very specific list of what is and isn't income. But for most people, that's going to be either your salary for your income's coming in, or if you're receiving Social Security or something like that. All of those things count as income. Anything else that's regularly coming in as a
Will your slides be accessible to us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I said, I know I'm going.
Excuse me?
If you write your email legibly and explain it, people will so much stuff.
Yeah, you'll be bombarded with a lot of stuff. And I'm going to leave 2 things as well, because I know I'm also holding you back from your lunch. I have cards here if you have more specific questions, because I know I'm going pretty fast. My wife always tells me I'm talking fast anyway. But I also will have a QR code if you want to scan it on your phone that will connect you directly to the Fairfax site so you can learn more about our program. So I'm going to have my laptop right over here. If you want to put that QR code pulled up as well. And I have my business. So, again, yes, sir, Ben, please go ahead.
Yeah, my question was, can the homeowner benefit from the equity, like with the equity line, or, while they're living in the home?
We are talking about giving people more access to their equity. Right now, you cannot add anything else onto the equity. So you can't pull from the equity until you sell. There's benefits and drawbacks of that. But because the equity is so limited, there's not a lot of opportunity to put, say, like a home equity line of credit in place until you've been there for a very long time. So we are considering other ways to do that, but we want to make sure someone's not in a situation essentially where they're upside down with overfinance. So right now we don't have the ability to add any like a line of credit or after.
Let's say we already own our home and we have a child or a family member we're trying to get rid of, and they need to purchase their own property. They have income and all that kind of good stuff. Can we help them do that without penalty in the program? Can we help them somehow with a down payment or,
You can. That's an important question. Actually, ask the lender, because a lot of lenders need to see that that money has been with that person for a certain amount of time. A lot of lenders will look at like a gift from a parent, and they'll say, well, that's not, what if the parent were, not able to give that gift in a year or 2 years, you might not be able to afford the house. So sometimes they want to see that you have enough of your own money. That said, for our program, you are allowed to do that, and you can help. The only thing that would change is if a parent was giving their child, let's say, a few $100s a month, and it was every month or ongoing, that actually would be considered income. So, and again, we would work really closely to try to help, our applicant understand kind of ultimately the people that we work with. But the short answer is yes, that's definitely something that can be done. And it's more important to talk through that with the lender and just make sure before you do anything like that, kind of like you were talking about before you do anything, make sure you understand what you're doing, and sooner rather than later start having some of those conversations. But yeah, if you want to get rid of your child and help them,
or other family members, or just somebody else. Help somebody.
But yeah. If you want to help them, you can certainly do that. It's just that it requires a little more sort of specific digging into what it's doing. So I'm going to go again, kind of quickly through a few other resources, but I'll be around to help answer any other questions. I talked already about certified housing counselors, so financial management, budgeting, credit counseling, pre-purchase, post-purchase. They do credit lending, education, all kinds of stuff. So this will be in the slides that you can look at. I mentioned Virginia Housing as well. Very strongly recommend doing some research into Virginia. They not only do homebuyer education, they have down payment assistance grants, they do closing cost assistance, they have second mortgages at 0% for people who qualify, they do first mortgages that are below market rate. They do all kinds of things. Again, that's more broad than the specific things that we're doing in the county, but it can also be paired together. So a lot of people will do is, even if they're purchasing a unit in Virginia County, they'll use Virginia Housing to get either the below market rate mortgages, or a lot of people will use the Virginia Housing resources to purchase, even if maybe they're not
Yes, Virginia Housing require you to go to their workshop first.
Right.
So you have to attend their education program, and they do give a certificate out and everything. So they do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth going through. It's
Oh,
a
yes.
really good.
Very
it's a really good
informative.
program.
We have a few of their booklets here, I'll send you this link, if you could just read them.
And then finally, just a couple of other resources. We've talked a lot about HUD. They still have a lot of really good information that is published. A lot of it about what it means to buy a house, what it takes to prepare to buy a house. So this ties very closely to those certified housing counselors that I talked about. So a lot of it overlaps, but you can do a lot of this on your own. They have some really good resources about how to prepare a budget, how to know if you're ready to buy a house, what those steps are, how to choose a lender, how to choose a real estate agent, how to avoid scams. There's all kinds of really good stuff on there. Very similarly, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is still exists for now, and they still have a lot of really good